The camera was mounted to count elk, crossing a saddle between two drainages before the winter closure. Pay attention to the flagging tape at 041, pink, tied at chest height, in a spot no survey crew had marked that season. The card held 68 days of footage, pulled by Karen Osei, Wildlife Habitat Technician 2, on a Tuesday in late October at the Bitterroot Ridge monitoring unit above Sula Creek. The camera sat on a lodgepole pine 40 yards off a game trail on the saddle, connecting Sula Creek to Rock Creek drainage, part of a 5-camera array tracking elk migration ahead of a proposed winter range closure. The herd had been shrinking for 6 years, pushed lower by drought and pressure from an expanding wolf pack to the north, and the agency needed hard crossing data before it could justify shutting the saddle to snowmobile traffic. Every frame mattered. Every elk that crossed in the right window was a data point that might save the herd's last high-elevation corridor. The camera was there to watch a herd figure out how to keep existing on a ridge that was quietly running out of room for them. Karen Osei is 34, a Wildlife Habitat Technician 2 with the State Fish and Wildlife Division, 11 years into fieldwork spanning 3 ranger districts. She has pulled and logged more trail camera cards than anyone else on the crew. And she can tell within a few frames whether an animal is a resident or a disperser by its gait and coat condition alone. She expected 68 days of elk, a few deer, maybe a bear before den up, and nothing else worth flagging in her notes. The first 40 days were exactly what the array was built for. Cow elk crossed the saddle in loose groups of 4 to 9, mostly between 6:10 and 7:40 in the morning, always moving north to south. A yearling bull triggered the sensor 11 times over 3 weeks, always alone, always pausing at the same downed log to browse. A black bear passed through twice in September, unhurried, gone in under 4 seconds each time. Wind moved the huckleberry brush enough to trigger false frames on windy afternoons, the kind of footage that fills a card and empties an analyst's patience. It was boring in the specific way. Good monitoring data is boring. Nothing surprising. Nothing that needed a second look. Karen scrolled at double speed through most of it, coffee going lukewarm, flagging elk counts into her spreadsheet without slowing for anything else. At 041 into the sequence marked day 44, a strip of pink flagging tape appears tied around a subalpine first 6 feet left of frame at roughly chest height, fluttering once in a gust before the frame ends. It sits well outside the survey grid Karen's crew had marked that season. Their tape was orange, always tied at eye level for visibility from a snowmobile, never pink. She notes it, thinks it might be an old berry picker's marker or a hunter's stand flag left over from a prior season, and keeps scrolling. Flagging tape in the backcountry is common enough that a stray strip rarely means anything. She moves on to the next elk crossing. 9 days later, on day 53, the tape appears again. Except now it is tied to a different tree, 30 feet further down the saddle, in a fresh color. Blue. The original pink tape is gone from its tree entirely. A single strip of flagging tape does not relocate itself 30 feet and change color in 9 days. Karen stops scrolling. She sets down the coffee and goes back to the beginning of the card. She watches it again, slower this time, logging every frame where tape appears anywhere in the visible field. The pattern holds with a precision that unsettles her more than any single frame could. The tape appears 7 times across the 68-day card, always between 5:50 and 6:15 in the morning, spaced exactly 9 days apart. Day 44, 53, 62, and so on through day 89, which falls just past the pull date and shows only a partial frame before the card runs out. Each appearance moves the tape between 30 and 35 feet further down the saddle, always in the same direction, always tied at the same deliberate chest height, always in a color that has not appeared on the card before. It came down the saddle the way a surveyor's stake line comes down a hillside, one placement leading logically to the next, mapping a route rather than marking a boundary. Karen begins to understand this is not incidental marking. Someone is laying out a path, one measured segment at a time, using the exact interval of 9 days like a fixed schedule they don't want to break. The most unsettling part of the pattern is not that someone is moving through a closed elk corridor. It is that the route, extended at the same bearing and the same interval, terminates almost exactly at the reservoir access road 3/4 of a mile below the saddle. The one road with a locked gate that the agency closes every October for the elk closure. At 5:58 a.m. on day 62, a raven startles off a nearby snag directly above the camera, and the subject looks up toward the sound instead of down at the ground where they had been walking. The frame holds their face for 1 second and 11 frames. Weathered around the eyes, maybe 50, a stillness in the posture of someone who has walked this exact grade enough times that they no longer watch their feet. The frame was run through the division's contractor and permit holder photo database, the same one used to cross-reference guide licenses and access permits. A match came back. The name attached to the match was Daniel Kowalczyk, 51, of Ravalli County. Karen's supervisor pulled every record tied to his name for that unit. No current elk guide permit, no active outfitter license, no water monitoring contract, no prior citations on file for the saddle or the reservoir access road. What existed instead was a lapsed contractor's permit from 9 years earlier for reservoir maintenance work that had ended when the contract was not renewed. The lack of any current authorization for foot traffic on the saddle during the closure window was not an accusation. It was simply what the record showed. Cross-referencing the tape's schedule against the permit history confirmed what the pattern already implied. Nobody currently held access rights matching this route, this frequency, or this time window. 7 tape placements, 32 nights of confirmed movement across the closure period once earlier season's cameras were checked, and 1 continuous route measuring just under 3/4 of a mile. That was the full scope the camera alone had documented. A 2-person crew followed the tape line on foot the following week, reading each marker against the last, working downhill toward the reservoir. The route was not casual. Each tape placement sat at a grade change or a rock band where a person carrying weight would need a decision point, the kind of trail marking done by someone who had laid out routes professionally before. Near the base, tucked behind a boulder field invisible from the access road, they found a cached supply point. Tarps, rope, 3 empty fuel cans, and a hand-built log crib holding back a small collapsed section of the reservoir's old maintenance spillway. The crib's timber joints were weathered gray, not fresh cut, indicating construction that predated the camera's 68-day window by years, not weeks. The full inventory at the site: 1 cache point, 4 tarps, 11 feet of reinforced log crib, and a hand line rigged along the steepest pitch for hauling gear up from the road. Daniel Kowalczyk worked reservoir maintenance for 18 years before the contract went to a lower bidder and was never offered back to him. He knew the spillway system better than the engineers who inherited it because he had built half of what they were now failing to maintain. When the contract ended, so did his only legal reason to be on that hillside, and with it went the only work he had ever been good at. The force behind this was not complicated. State maintenance budgets had been cut for 3 straight years, and the reservoir's aging spillway infrastructure had been quietly deteriorating under a rotating cast of contractors who never stayed long enough to understand it the way Kowalczyk had. What he lost when his contract wasn't renewed was not just income. It was the one structure in his life that gave his days a shape and his knowledge a use. He did not see himself as trespassing. He understood himself as the only person still doing the maintenance the crib needed to survive the winter, on a schedule he had set himself because no one else was keeping it. The 9-day interval was not arbitrary. It matched the freeze-thaw cycle he had used for years to check crib settling before a hard freeze could crack the joints. A man simply avoiding attention would not have retied a hand line to the exact tension it needed after each storm. That is not the behavior of someone hiding. It is the behavior of someone maintaining. And yet Kowalczyk was not someone stealing water, or sabotaging the spillway, or profiting from what he built. He was not selling access, not damaging the structure, not evading the closure to hunt or poach. He was returning, on a schedule he trusted more than the agencies, to keep a piece of infrastructure standing that had once been his responsibility and, in his understanding, still was. The fact that makes this case hard is not that he trespassed. It is that the crib he was maintaining without authorization was, by the engineer's own later assessment, in better condition than any other section of that spillway system. Investigators did not need to search for him. The cadence had already told them exactly when and where he would appear next. Day 98, the 9th day past the last confirmed frame. Same time window, same bearing. 2 officers were waiting near the cache point before dawn. Kowalczyk arrived at 5:57 a.m. carrying a coil of rope and a hand level, and he did not run. He set the rope down slowly, the way a person sets down something they intend to pick back up later. And he stood with his shoulders squared toward the spillway rather than toward the officers. In his possession, one hand level, 40 feet of coiled rope, a folding pry bar, and a small notebook logging joint measurements dated back 9 years. He said almost nothing beyond confirming his name. Kowalczyk was charged with unauthorized entry onto restricted watershed property and unpermitted structural modification of state water infrastructure, both misdemeanor counts under the state's Water Resources Code. The statute allows for up to 1 year of incarceration and a $5,000 fine per count. He was sentenced to 18 months of probation, a $4,000 fine, and a formal ban from the reservoir property and surrounding watershed unit for the length of his probation. The crib itself was inspected by state engineers, found structurally sound, and left in place rather than demolished, with maintenance folded into the following year's contract cycle. The notebook was entered into evidence and later returned to him at the close of the case. The reservoir's spillway now carries a permanent monitoring camera at the exact point where the flagging tape first appeared. The knot in this case is not whether Kowalczyk broke the law. He did, clearly and repeatedly, on a schedule precise enough to prosecute on its own. The knot is that the structure he was illegally maintaining needed exactly the maintenance he was illegally providing, and the agency did not have a legal mechanism to let the one person who understood it keep doing the work. The force that was not in the courtroom was the maintenance budget. It was the contract that went to the lowest bidder instead of the most capable one. It walked out of that courtroom exactly as it walked in, unnamed, unindicted, and untouched by the 18 months of probation levied against the man it left behind. The court was not wrong to convict him. Unauthorized entry onto restricted infrastructure is unauthorized entry, regardless of how well the entrant maintains what he finds there. But the ruling could not reach the fact that the system meant to replace him never actually did. The harder question is what a maintenance record is worth against a permit record when the two disagree about who is actually taking care of something. Nobody in that courtroom had to answer it because the law was never built to ask it. It is not stewardship exactly, and it is not trespass exactly. It is just a man who kept showing up for a job that had already stopped paying him, on a schedule the reservoir kept better than anyone with the authority to fire him. The camera on Bitterroot Ridge had been mounted to a lodgepole pine to count elk crossing a saddle before the winter closure. For 68 days it counted elk, cataloged a lone yearling bull, and logged 2 passes from a black bear moving toward its den. It also documented a hand-tied route of flagging tape, descending the saddle 9 days at a time, mapping a line no survey crew had drawn. And it kept every frame, every knot, every 9-day gap, until the pattern itself told investigators more than the man standing in front of them ever said. Every case on this channel starts with something that doesn't belong in the frame, a strip of pink tape tied at chest height where no crew had marked, a raven startling a face into the light for 11 frames, a hand-built log crib holding back a spillway years before anyone official knew it needed holding. Pay attention to what the camera keeps.